Welcome to a new episode of Die Datenräume, the data space specialists. This is the podcast by the Fraunhofer Institute for Software and Systems Engineering, ISST, that focuses on data-driven innovation. In today's episode, we dive into an important topic for our global economies, cross-border data sharing data to overcome global challenges. This episode is a special edition. It features the recording of a panel discussion on cross-border data sharing that took place at the German Digital Summit on October 22nd, 2024 in Frankfurt. What is it about? In this episode, we look at how data sharing can help address global challenges such as climate change and supply chain crises. We discussed these challenges with 9 experts from industrial and technology companies and examined the challenges, opportunities, and possibilities for cross-border data sharing along key value chains. The panelists shared valuable insights from different economic regions such as Japan, China, and Europe. Let me briefly introduce the panelists. These were Dr. Reinhold Achatz, Chairman of the Board and President of the International Data Spaces Association, Professor Svenja Falk, Managing Director at Accenture Research, Thomas Hahn, Siemens Fellow, Siemens AG, and Head of the Guidance Board of International Manufacturing X, Leona King, Researcher at KU Leuven Center for IT and IP Law, Georg Kuber, Global Vice President of Industry Data Ecosystems at SAP, Head of the MX Guidance Board and Consortium Co-Lead for Factory X, Takahide Matsutsuka, Senior Research Director at Fujitsu Research, Luise Müller-Hofstede, Director of Business Development and Strategic Partnership of Circular, and member of the Board of Directors at Catena X, Michael Plagge, Vice President Ecosystem Development at the Eclipse Foundation, Yun-Hai Kim, Director of Partnerships Development at Huawei. The session was moderated by Boris Otto, Institute Director of the Fraunhofer Institute for Software and Systems Engineering, ISST. Now, let's step directly into their intensive and fruitful discussion. Enjoy.
So I'm happy to have you here. My name is Boris Otto. I work for Fraunhofer. In fact, I'm director of Fraunhofer ISST. And it's my great pleasure today to moderate this session here on cross-border data sharing. Today in this session, we will touch upon mainly 3 points. First of all, we would like to highlight why this is important. So why do we have to, let's say, be concerned about sharing data across borders? The second thing is that we want to address is where do we stand today? So what's working well? And where do we have room for improvement? So what kind of approaches do we have that we already have put into practice? And the third thing that I would like to touch upon is what is ahead of us? So what do we have to do together? What is, let's say, perhaps also a joint roadmap that we need to embark on in order to make cross-border data sharing happen? Of course, as you see, it's a topic which is both important, but of course also urgent. And that is also the reason why we need to also consider multiple perspectives. And this is also the reason why we have, let's say, not only a great topic, a great lineup of panelists, but only limited time, of course, as always. This is why we will have this panel a little bit more dynamic as usual. So we have 9 great panelists, but not all of them will be on the stage at the same point of time. So I have, of course, the pleasure to ask them on stage, but I also have, let's say, the duty to ask them from the stage, so to say. Saying that, I think we are all set, good to go. Let's get started. So it's my pleasure to ask the first three panelists to the stage. And I would like to start with Luise Müller-Hofstetter. Where is she? There, over there. Luise, come right here. Very good. And also I would like to ask, right, big applause, Thomas Hahn on the stage. Please also join us here up front. And I would also like to ask Taka Matsutsuka onto the stage. Excellent. So, of course, ladies first, and I would like to start with you, Luise. You work for Circular, and of course you have, let's say, the notion of circularity obviously already in the name of your company. And you work as Director of Business Development in Circular. So could you please outline us a little bit, well, what you do the entire day, so to say, and what this has to do with circularity and also the circular economy and data sharing? Luise,
thanks. Hi, everyone. Good to be here. Yeah, where do I start? I think my role here on this panel is also to bring in circular economy as one of the reasons why we talk about digitalization. And I think sometimes these two topics, digitalization and circular economy, are being treated too separately. Basically, if you imagine yourself, the digitalization being the motor, then circular economy is the fuel. It's the answer to why we are actually doing this in one of the sectors. And we need to talk about data when we talk about sustainability. We need to talk about data, especially when we talk about circular economy, because without the data, circular economy is almost not possible. We also need to talk about cross-border data sharing, because the products that we use in our daily lives, and in a second I'm also going to talk a little bit about batteries. Those supply chains are very complex, very global, and in order to transmit information that we need in order to make the right decisions at the end of a product's life, or supposedly the end of a product's life, we need to have information, and information is data. And those informations need to come from all supply chain participants to understand what does my product consist of? Is it still good to go for a second life? Is it good to go into recycling? Do I get money for recycling, or is somebody else paying money for my recycling?
Yeah.
So,
excellent. I think this is, as you said, this is a perfect example why, let's say, cross-border data sharing is important. I should have said that you are also together, we are together in the board of directors of Catena X, and sometimes Catena X is a little bit like referred to as, let's say, initiative of the big ones, but obviously your company is not a big one. So how do you see your role in Catena X?
I think it's obviously you see the big names connected to Catena, but without the smaller companies, not like us, but especially suppliers, all of this wouldn't be possible. My role is, like you, to support Catena and to enable the industry as a whole to make use of standardized data exchange along the value chain, because without standardization, all of this becomes too crazy.
Yeah, that's a nice notion, right? So very good. So let me continue, Thomas, with you. So you are from Siemens. Many of you know you very well. You are a Siemens Fellow and also head of the guidance board of International Manufacturing X. But coming back to your role in Siemens, why is, let's say, cross-border data sharing so important for a company like Siemens?
When you're looking, and you mentioned this just some seconds before, this example of battery circularity and so on, we have global supply chains. We are a global supplier, and we have in our chain also global supplier which we are using. So meaning, and this is not only physical goods, it's also about data. Think about you have to transfer or to look at maintaining a system or something else. You have to exchange data to construct a product or something else. It's not only a physical good, it's also data. First of all, we have global supply chains, and we are inside this network. Second topic is, we have international business. So, and when you're looking at the different numbers, it's depending in which vertical you are inside. So this is a significant double-digit number, not only for the big ones, but also I was once visiting a small company producing robot systems. and have seen, they have a lot of packages, and they're going around the world. Also it's not only that the big one are, let's say, in global business, no, also the small and medium-sized enterprises are also in a global business. Yeah. And this is really a significant double-digit number. Yeah. And last but not least, and you mentioned this before, this is for different regions, it's also for different verticals, and therefore I 100% second here to comment regarding standards, because we have to look how we make an global interoperability.
Yeah. Very good. I mean, this is something that is sometimes, at least from my observation, a little bit forgotten. It's not an end in itself to share data, but it's, let's say, to stay competitive and let's say be a successful business. Exactly. Right. Very good. So that brings me also to Taka. Also, warm welcome to you once more. Taka, good to have you here. You are working as a research director at Fujitsu Research. What are you researching?
Okay, thank you very much for introducing me. I am Taka Matsuzuka. Hello, everyone. And I'm working in Fujitsu, coming from Japan on this Sunday. And our company is basically the technology company, so not only for selling the goods and stuff, but also the research for the new technologies. And I'm on the research wing of the company. And especially, of course, we are researching on the various topics, including AI and computing and quantum and data and security and so on and so forth. I'm from the data and security side of it. And for data and security, especially I'm working on the how we can make trust, cross-border trust in a data spaces or data sharing, because the data spaces are, of course, this is the notion itself is coming from Europe, but in Japan, this is actually not very new. It's back in 7-8 years ago it started. And also I'm working on that from that time. And in terms of a Japanese situation, we have already the two types of data spaces, two kinds of data spaces, which one is the so-called data EX and the other is Uranos. Maybe some of you might know that. But anyway, so the next question is how we can make them interoperable within them and also with the European data spaces, because they are fundamentally different from various ways. So that's what basically I'm doing.
Yeah. Perhaps to touch upon that, you mentioned it, and I think everybody would agree that one of the key requirements is trust to make, in particular, industrial data ecosystems happen. And that's, you can, in my point of view, let's say trust in the data and in the use of the data, but of course, in the first place, it's trust among participants, right? So how do you see, let's say, the entire question around identities? You mentioned it, the situation in Japan is a bit different than in Europe. What's let's say, your assessment of where we stand in that regard?
Exactly. The identity itself is a quite a fundamental concept in data sharing. Without it, I can't say who I am, or I can't tell who you are. No. So it's quite fundamental. But at the same time, while we could make the identity or identifier the world the standard, but I don't think it's quite adequate, appropriate, or feasible, because it takes a long time. Second, the ID system itself should be, from my opinion, it's a country sovereign. So it's basically based on that way. We have different systems depending on the country or industry, and we need to figure out how we can make them interoperable in some way.
I think that's an important point that you mentioned, Taka, because of course, I mean, if we want to cooperate, we need to have some standards, and there are, of course, various fields that we need to set standards for. And in some areas, we will be able to come up with global standards, but in others, probably not. And I guess that I'm not, let's say, a prophet, but I think looking into the future, I'm not so sure whether, let's say, EIDAS 2.0 will be adopted in all places of this world. Probably not. So probably we have to have a mapping in that regard. Talking about standard setting, and Thomas, and that brings me also again back to you. I know that you have been, let's say, long years in the field of standardization for industries. I mean, a standard does not just emerge by itself. People need to work together, right? And I, of course, know you are very active in international manufacturing. Could you outline a little bit what you do there in the International Manufacturing X Council, and what that is also meaning for finding standards and also talking about requirements?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe saying 2-3 words about International Manufacturing X Corporation or Council. Yep. You know, we set it up in a way from the US, Europe, different countries, Asia. We met us, by the way, last week in Tokyo at an event where we exactly have the International Manufacturing X cooperation topics. The first of all is how we are setting this up is, you know, you mentioned before trust. We have to trust each other. Then we have to respect each other. So we have to look what are the needs in the different countries. You mentioned EIDAS 2.0, right? We have to look how we are making some kind of framework where you can plug in different, depending on the regions, but also depending on the needs from the verticals. It's not only the region perspective, could be also in a vertical different. Think about manufacturing and healthcare, for example. Then you immediately smell that differences. It's not only a regional topic, it's also a vertical topic. But nevertheless, to set up some kind of common framework that we do this. For example, with this trust identity topic, I think that's what we are doing. And in the National Manufacturing X project, we have, let's say, 3 layers which we are addressing. So one is to understand each other, to exchange knowledge, to learn from each other, to respect what the others are doing, and looking at what are the regional needs. One layer. Second issue is we are looking what are the infrastructures, which could be different because one fits all will be not the solution. And the third thing exactly is that we extract what we can jointly drive forward to standardization. And standardization not meaning, let's say, a consent-based standardization with a long process. It could be also a meaning to have some kind of de facto standardization.
Very good. Thomas, that also brings me to my first duty to ask you from the stage. Thank you very much for your great contribution. So perhaps and that also brings us, let's say, to the end a little bit of the first, cycle of discussion, which I outlined in the beginning. So why are we talking about cross-border data sharing? And to summarize it already at this point a little, we heard it's, embarking into new kinds of business. We heard about the circular economy, and by the way, I should say that I was very surprised that this is such a hot topic also in the US even. So I thought that would be driven forward mainly only in Europe and Asia, but it's really also a big thing in the US. The next thing is, it's in the end all about business. In the end, in order to stay competitive, we need to also embark into new business opportunities. And of course, data sharing then means to, look into areas where we can identify potential for common standards. And if that is not the case, respecting and learning from each other. I think that was very good, Thomas. And then also mapping, let's say, individual local standards, right? All right, and that brings me to the second round, where we focus a little bit on, where we stand, what's already working and what's not working so well. And that brings me to my dear friend Reinhold, and I would like to ask you on stage. Reinhold Achatz, please. Reinhold, we have been knowing each other for long. We are also on the board of the International Data Space Association, and by coincidence, of course, right now you happen to be the chairman of the board, so actually my boss in that regard, so I need to be careful with the questions that I pose here. So could you please reflect a little bit, because you were also very instrumental in OPC and so on, a little bit where we stand when we talk about international standardization for data sharing.
Yeah, from my point of view, and thank you for putting that question up, international standardization is a very important topic, and specifically in software, it does not work as it worked in the past, basically by standard bodies only, I think. And you mentioned OPC, and with OPC we have a lot of experience that we really created a solution first. We brought the solution into the market, and we really proved that the solution was working. And then we basically put a working solution to the standardization bodies, and this is now an international standard, and it's really used since nearly 20 years. So I think this is exactly how we have to work for data spaces as well, and this is exactly our idea. So data spaces organization, IDSA, was created 8 years ago now, and now we have a working standard or working solution for data exchange, the data exchange protocol, basically. And this is exactly now going into the standardization. And the same is basically true for database concepts. So we have in the moment 2 things which are really internationally standardized. And I think this is very important. On the other hand, obviously, and we are talking about cross-border data exchange, this standard does not include in the moment cross-border, because basically we say we work based on internet, and internet is international. So there is no technical reason to worry about cross-border. But obviously, we are talking about data exchange between different legal frameworks. And out of a sudden, there is a reason to worry about a border, because they are the borders between different legal frameworks. Now what we are discussing is basically how can we really classify data that we basically can really transfer them cross-border. And I think I take the example of China. China has a definition of 3 types of data. One is open data, so you can share it freely, no problem, public data basically. Then there's the notion of important data. And important data, in the moment, you have really to ask for an export allowance to do it, which I think is very difficult. And here we have the idea to define what we call policy engine, which really can check software technically, automatically. Is it legal to export it, and under what circumstances is it illegal to export it? And then basically we have the personal data, and the notion of personal data in China is, by the way, pretty much the same as in Europe, besides that the state is allowed to have access to any data, but on the other hand, personal data are protected in a similar way as they are in Europe. So I think this is exactly what we have to think about. So yes, we have standards already on the data-based technology, but where we are working on, and we definitely need to define something. And obviously we are as well traveling to China next week to exactly have a continuous discussion exactly on those topics with Chinese colleagues and with Chinese organizations in the government, National Data Bureau, for example, really to say how can we define a process to say which data are open data. And I think you talked about environmental data, circularity data earlier. So my proposal will be that those data are defined as open data so that we can share them freely, but it's not defined yet. So basically, this is something we have to achieve. And on the other hand, as I said earlier, we have to define ways how can we exchange important data. And in the first place, we decided not to go too much into personal data because this is, let's say, let's solve the easier problems first. This is a little strategy we have.
I think this is always a good strategy, right? Yeah, as you explained it very, very well, Reinhold, that, I mean, we have already achieved a lot. We have the data space protocol, but it's, let's say, to talk about interoperability on a cross-border basis requires to looking at more than one, only the technical level, but also, let's say, legal frameworks, for example. And we talked about identities, but let me come back, Taka, to you. Because, I mean, to a certain extent, this is preaching to the converted, right? We all like identities and stuff and protocols and so on. But I think we have a big opportunity ahead of us. If we look, for example, further down the road and further develop the entire arena of, let's say, trust around identities towards digital wallets. How do you see that?
Yes, thank you. The identity wallets, basically the digital identity wallets are being established in people and also the companies, especially here in Europe. And actually in Japan it's not yet, but we are working on it. This concept, of course, as Boris said, it's naturally extended to other than that.
Yeah.
And I can give you an example that there is a company called Komatsu in Japan. This is a company to manufacture a lot of the excavators and bulldozers, that kind of construction machines. And they have the system that to locate their construction machines wherever in the world, and also the status of the machines. And this is actually, surprisingly, this is well managed and well operated already on 20 years now. Of course, this is centrally managed. That's why they can easily not easily, but they made it back in 20 years ago. But if we think about the current data sharing culture and we expand the notion that to include various stakeholders, it's not just only from the one manufacturer managing their own machines, but also we can think of the multiple, of course, the sites, construction sites or factories, introducing multiple the machines from multiple vendors, and also the factories, and also parts and so on and so forth. So from that point of view, the centralized management no longer valid or not working. Oh. So we need to think about the decentralized type of management. And then the wallet idea, digital identity wallet idea can come in. And based on that, we can... of course, this is not yet fully established. So actually, Boris, we already started some sort of the collaboration to how it can make it grounded and actually work in a real situation. So we started to work on that.
Very good. And perhaps also because I think we mentioned EIDAS a couple of times, or to be precise, EIDAS 2.0, and it's put into effect, and we will have it, the governments are obliged to provide it to us like in 2 or 3 years from now, so we will all end up with a wallet here. So if we, let's say, transfer this discussion around identities wallets to, let's say, beyond the purely industrial realm, and I know that in Japan, the society is, let's say, a big driver, of course, also for digital innovation. Do you have some examples where you can imagine where these kind of things are, let's say, really making sure that the rubber hits the ground?
Yeah, I'm talking about the from digital identity point of view, but of course the whole purpose is how we can safely and securely share the data in good way. And after all, this can be used as, of course, for the innovation and also for the good society. And the whole data sharing is meant for, from my opinion, to get the more optimized way of managing things, like how we can operate the whole cities or society. And how we can integrate the different things bit and piece and together, and also adapt to the change that we observe. So after all, this is a whole thing that we can go for the better society, and could be the sustainable society and that kind of things.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Taka. Now it's my duty to ask you from the stage. So thank you once more. Very good, Taka. And we move on with 2 further great panelists. And I would like to ask first Svenja Falk onto the stage right here. And also Georg Kubel. Where's Georg? Georg, please come up front here. Very good, very good. So I think my cards here tell me that I should start with Georg, but of course I'm a polite person. I should start with ladies first, of course, which means I change. So Svenja, we have touched a little bit on the business model piece, but I know this is very close to your heart. You are also leading the Digital Business Model Working Group in the Platform Industry 4.0. How do you look at all these discussions about technology, standards, protocol, in particular if you look at it from an international cross-border point of view?
Yeah, thank you for this question. And sometimes I'm a little bit worried when we talk about sort of digital infrastructure and framework and concepts and standards. It's always this build it and they will come. So I think it's important that we start with sort of market demands, customer needs, societal needs when we design digital frameworks and digital approaches. Some of you were here yesterday when the Chancellor spoke, and he said, what is the most important thing that we need? And what we need are digital business models that work. That was the first thing he said. And that was, I think, a very, very important statement. Another thing on the business models is he also talked a little bit about productivity. And our productivity backlash that we have in Europe is very much related to the public sector, and the services industry. Our industry actually is a productivity champion. So if you look at the productivity levels of the European and German companies, we can be very proud. But what can you do with productivity? Will you sell more machines or more cars when you are more productive? Probably not. So I think we always have to think about, rather than thinking how much more juice we can squeeze out of the lemon, what are the digital business models that will differentiate us in an increasingly competitive market where the resources are scarce. And therefore, things like you do, thinking about sort of new sources of value that we can sort of help to improve our economic competitiveness and the meaning of life in society is something that you do so remarkably well in Japan, always connecting this to. This is, I think, how we have to think about it.
It's perhaps to touch upon or follow up on this, because I like this picture with squeezing the lemon, which of course is a first, starting point, because that's of no harm so much to, let's say, other competitors' businesses. But and also to be a bit provocative, perhaps, I think, let's say, the entire notion about business modeling in the data economy and also in the platform economy is sometimes, it seems to be a little bit textbook knowledge style. So how do you see, let's say, the adoption of these kind of, let's say, truly groundbreaking data-driven digital business models in Germany, but also, let's say, across the globe, because that is where the potential comes from, right?
I think we have all of us have started to think really, really, really big about the data economy when the consumer platforms came into play. But we have not seen that scale, and we have also not seen the business models when it comes to industry. Industry is complex. The ability to scale it is far more limited. But what we have seen, and this is a good thing, that the overall sort of level in industry have raised a lot. But the ability to monetize have been somewhat limited if you compare it to sort of what we have seen in the consumer platforms economy. Is that desirable to have sort of monopoly-like structures where sort of the business case of the business model about advertising and so on, the value addition is unclear? I'm not sure, but we still have to collectively think about sort of the top line business models, and therefore some of the ideas shared already here are so important, and we have to take that further together. Thank you.
Very good, that's true. Talking about monetization, that brings me, Georg, to you. Monetizing in the digital field, you basically are responsible for everything which SAP does in the manufacturing domain, more or less, right? And you are also one of the key. Key drivers
you tell this to my boss? I would really like to hear that.
At least you come across like that to me. No, just kidding. But you are also, let's say, a key asset in Factory X. And my question is, how do you see, let's say, the potential of cross-border data sharing from an SAP software perspective? So, I mean, of course, there's a reason why you engage so deeply in, let's say, these initiatives. And if you could explain that a little bit.
I could say the reason is Ernst, because he explains it well to me and convinced me, but that's not true. I mean, if you think about SAP, we are a 52-year-old global startup, right? That's really what we are. We are working together with companies around the world, with small and large. And I just looked it up this morning. 87% of the global trade value goes through SAP customers, Achatz systems. So we're in a situation where when we think about data volume, it sits in SAP systems, right? So when anybody says, let's create a data space or let's talk about data sharing, then we need to immediately think about our customers because they will be affected. They own the data that has to be shared. They are the beneficiaries of the business models that you just talked about. So for us, it's a simple matter of evolving our business, evolving our customer relations to what they will need in the future. We believe, or let me be more precise, I personally believe, and I'm continuing to convince more people in SAP to believe that data spaces are the technology of the future. They are the provision or the foundation for business models that our customers will want to pursue, right? And therefore, this is it's an obligation for our customers, but it's also a natural way to expand our business and to evolve our business. And of course, as I said it, our customers are international, so cross-border always means if I develop a product in Germany, I want to sell it in Japan with small changes. And if I develop a product for the automotive industry, I would like to sell it in the industrial manufacturing industry. So cross-border data sharing for us is a necessity to be efficient in what we do. And this is why we take this so serious. And you're right, we do this in many ways. We are supporting 5 projects: Catena-X, Factory-X, Semico, Aerospace, and Chemical, if it gets funded, which I believe it will very soon. And we're also engaging in the different councils because we think it's very important.
You mentioned an important point regarding the role that SAP plays in these ecosystems. And perhaps you also mentioned that, of course, Catena-X and Factory-X are parts of a program called Manufacturing X. But of course, the individual, let's say, projects differ in terms of, let's say, also their situation where they come from, the structure of the industry. Mm-hmm. And of course, when we look into Factory X, where we have, they are not really small, those companies, but they are smaller compared to BMW or Mercedes. My question then is, isn't that, let's say, accelerating or making even more important the role that you have, for example, as SAP, but also Siemens, in basically get, let's say, the ecosystem going? Do you have, let's say, a catalyzing effect on these? Yeah,
I'd like to think so, because companies look at us to support their business processes. I mean, it's true, right? They would come to us and say, so how would I do this with SAP? Now, you can like it or not, but that's the situation. Now, if we can tell them, well, this is how you would do it with SAP and using data spaces, then that certainly has a catalyst version. Yeah. And I always look at a company that sits in between all these industries, delivers into many of them, sources from many of them, maybe is international, even though it's small. And this company needs to interact with all these data spaces that are emerging in a homogeneous and in a seamless way. I think that's what we need to achieve.
Very good. That brings me again, Louise, to you. Talking about, let's say, making sure that it is adopted also on a global scale. We talked about it earlier. We are both in the board of directors of Catena-X. Perhaps you can also explain a little bit to the audience what we in Catena did in order to achieve this global outreach, and also make sure, and Thomas, I come back to what you said, that it's not just, look, this is what we have, but also learning from other places in the world in order to make the own approach better, right? If you could say something about that.
Sure. I think we heard before that standards don't just fall from the sky, and in order for them to be accepted, used, and adopted, a massive amount of collaboration needs to be there first. And so right from the beginning with Catena, it was quite important, even though the spark came out of Germany, let's put it this way, this cannot be considered as a German initiative, right? It was right from the beginning globally thought after. And we've, especially in the last year, I would say we as the association really made or achieved great milestones. We have created hubs, so a North American hub in Detroit that was just announced last week, as well as in China, also just recently announced. There are MOUs in place with Japan. We have a Sweden hub, a Swedish hub, a French hub, all of them quite active. And obviously the idea is that those hubs then, create like a ripple effect on their own.
Yeah, and also, I mean, that's, as you said, Catena X was from the very beginning meant to be an international initiative, and I can tell everybody it's also lots of fun because it's of course working with, let's say,
we fight a lot.
All sorts of people from all different places. It's really a great thing. Thank you very much, Luise. Now it's time for me to ask you from the stage. It's a little bit, but thank you very much for your insight. Thank you very much. And that brings me to our next panelist, Yunhai Jin. If I may ask you onto the stage. Yunhai, you work for Huawei. You are a director of partnership and development. Very good. And again, also I'd like to ask you what you do for a living, so to say, what you do the entire day, and also how that is related to what Reinhold already touched upon a little bit, the strategic role of data in China.
Yeah, thank you for Professor Boris, and it's a very honor to be here. And my name is Yunhai. I'm from Huawei, a much younger company than SAP, right? Yeah, startup, also, yeah. I'm from the Huawei Cloud ecosystem team, and I'm in charge of the ecosystem partnerships on the Huawei Cloud. So, thanks for the Professor Boris, and we are being in the Catena X and also this IDSA roles for a long time. And this is what mainly I'm doing. Yeah, and for your questions about China, for me it's personally we are not for the government strategy, but this is based on all what we have seen. For China and Germany, the government visited China, and in April we discussed a lot during this various industries, especially for the high-tech related. And then in June, so between these two governments have signed an MOU that how to do the data exchange and how to from each other to helping the AI, the manufacturing or other industries, and to share the data. That's what we can see. And thanks for the large population of China. In China there are a lot of data, and these data are really getting more and more valuable compared to the previous, and especially for the AI era we can see. So the government actually right now are putting this data as the powerful of driven this technology growing in China. Yeah, that's the situation right now. Yeah.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Because you referred to, let's say, also the talks on, let's say, governmental level, and as also Svenja quoted Olaf Scholz. What I remember, I think he said it last year. No, it was at Hannover Fair, I believe. But he said that, let's say, de-risking and diversification does not mean that we will end up with less relationships, but with more, right? So, and I think that is something that is also driving us, and that brings me also to Reinhold, to you once more, because there is this strategy, I have to write it down because it's hard to remember, the strategy for international digital policy of the federal government of Germany, which basically also, is related, of course, to, let's say, the digital strategy overall. And since you are member of the advisory council of the Digitalstrategie in Germany, how do you see this? And also, how do you, let's say, the role of data spaces, which is explicitly mentioned in this policy? Is that just, something which is written down, or can we really basically live up to what has been written down? What's your impression of these kinds?
Yeah, I think maybe I refer shortly to the task in this council we are working on. And as it was already described this morning, we basically were asked by the Ministry of Digital and Traffic basically to look at the strategy, but precisely we were asked to look at lighthouse projects. And to be honest, the team was not so happy, and we said because looking at lighthouse project does not create that much value, because it's really like, and Maren said this morning, it's like Abiturprüfung, basically like an examination where people have to present and others are judging whether they're presenting the right thing or the wrong thing. So for that reason, we basically decided as a team, really to say, yes, now we have to look at specific topics where we can help the project to be successful. And this means we defined the so-called clusters. And one of the clusters was obviously data management, and data spaces. And this is exactly where we had a very good discussion. And we discussed as well, how can we use standardization? How can we use topics like manufacturing X? How can we use mobility data space to create one standard, basically, of data sharing and data exchange, which can be reused everywhere. And this is exactly what is needed, basically, for data sharing, as we said earlier. And on the other hand, in parallel, which was not related to our council, basically an MOU was signed between China and Germany, basically, to work in cross-border data sharing. And on the other hand, and a third event happened, that I was asked basically by a company I'm consulting. We want to share economical data on environment and sustainability, basically, as well, which was mentioned earlier, because we need for basically the tax we have to pay on CO2, carbon border adjustment mechanism, and for the CO2 reporting, we need as well data from China or from the supply chain. And this is basically now the connection as well to Catena X and all the activities, because basically Catena X has as well the idea, and I think in future we will talk about the digital product passport. We will talk about which exactly has as well sustainability data as part of the content as well, which will help us to understand better recycling, because we know the content of material. So I think the whole thing is fitting together. And from my point of view, and this is something we really have to establish, is really that from on one hand, from German side, we really have to work together, to come together and basically have one discussion, because there is no Catena X data exchange and no data exchange for company Y. There is only one data exchange rule, and this has to be precisely defined. Yeah. And I think this rule has to be based on different levels from my point of view. Basically, there's a data exchange level, and as I said earlier, this is already standardized basically as a data exchange protocol. But now we have, from my point of view, have to look at the different areas, different industries, and to go through industry by industry, basically, and say what data are important data, what data are open data in specific industries. And obviously, we are very interested to define as much or as many data pieces as possible as open data, because then they can be freely shared. But then we have to come exactly to the discussion of how important data are handled and how can we exchange important data, as I said earlier. And this is exactly what we want to achieve. First, get a better understanding what is the Chinese definition of open data, and I hope I learn much more next week. And on the other hand, we have to come to a conclusion, how can we really create a software-defined rule which allows us to really exchange important data as well, without going to a legal organization, basically having a first check of which is in the moment done, is the data correct, which takes a week, and then are there data allowed to transfer, which takes at least 40 days. So basically, before you can transfer the first data, you have at least 2 months are going by, and so this is something which is in today's modern technology is not realistic. I want to share a product with a digital product passport, and I have to wait at least 2 months until I can ship the product, because without digital product passport I cannot ship the product. That's not acceptable. So we have to come to a reasonable solution, and this is exactly the negotiation which has to go on from a European side, from my point of view, with China, with Japan as well, with US. I think we have to define a global standard, and we have to come to global rules. And from my point of view, this is important and urgent to do, because otherwise, we will have hurdles to overcome for working and cooperating globally, which is totally unrealistic in today's world. Digital world, where everything is basically happening in the blink of an eye.
Very good. That makes it very tangible. You said, let's say, we can't afford to live, let's say, with, let's say, cycle times for data sharing of, let's say, 50 days or more. That needs to be brought down. That was very, let's say, tangible and, let's say, to the point. Thank you very much, Reinhold. Now it's my duty to ask you from the stage, and that also brings us to, let's say, the end of the second round, where we looked a little bit about where we at where we stand, and to summarize that also already briefly. I think we have seen that we have already altogether achieved a lot. We have lots of, let's say, hubs. We are engaged in many projects. We heard about also International Manufacturing X Council. We work on standards and also joint protocols. But there are also, of course, differences, let's say, also in terms, we touched about it, let's say, how, let's say, personal data is used in the different areas of the world, and this will probably never come together. Also, let's be very honest here. But of course, when we look into a number of other things, we are sitting in the same boat, and we need to work together. And I think this is something that brings us also nicely to the third round, which asks, well, what is it what we have to do all together? What is our joint action plan to make cross-border data sharing happen and make it more effective, as Reinhold just pointed out, to bring down this 50 days as much as we can. And that brings me also talking about, let's say, how we design the future to my next panelist. And I would like to ask Michael Plagge here on stage. Michael, warm welcome also to you. And perhaps I need to share an anecdote, because when we recently worked together, we wrote a little article on open source, and one of my idea was to, let's say, to put open source software in the center of that message. And Michael said, no, it's more about the process, that counts. And please, Michael, you have to explain to our audience why you are convinced that not the end result, but the process is what counts.
Yeah, absolutely. So open source is a licensing scheme, right? So if someone says we do open source, that's usually not what you want. Because there are what we call single vendor open source project, like Android open source project, which is open source, but try to convince Google to add a feature to the system or just continue a feature where Google decide to discontinue. So we talk way more about open collaboration to make this successful. But Boris, if you allow, I would like to connect a little bit to what Svenja just said and sure. what came to my mind when I was sitting there and listening. We talked about business cases, right? And the money in data spaces will be earned between the data provider and the data consumer. And there's maybe a little bit money to earn for organizations operating data spaces, but there's hardly any money for organization who wants to implement data space components like a data space connector. So if we now take that limited money for implementation and spend this on 20 different versions of the same component, that doesn't make sense. No. So I think there should be, and we talked a lot about collaboration on standards. I would like to call for collaboration implementations and for as few as possible. Because as I said, limited money, no business case in implementing. Let's make sure that we focus this small money on as few as possible implementations. And because if you have 20 implementations, you need to make sure there's 20 implementation interoperable. And even they claim to implement a standard, there's no thing like an out-of-the-box interoperability for software component to a standard. So if you have one component and you need to test it against 19 others and there's no money, that's doomed to fail. So work on as few implementation as possible. And we didn't even touch on open source, right? Yeah. Then on open source, why open source? It's easy, because if you would like to do cross-border data sharing, you should have trust not only on the identity, but also trust in the implementation. Yeah. I think collaborating in open source under the umbrella of foundation, according to defined governance or framework, that's the way to build trust, that everyone is willing to use the same implementation, because only if it's transparent and everyone can check what's inside the implementation, finally there's consent that this is a trusted implementation I can use in a quality which is, with a few implementation, much better than if we would spread the same amount of money on 20 or 50 different implementations.
Oh, very good, very good. That also brings me to Georg once more, because you are also a member, or even one of the co-chairs, if I'm not mistaken, Georg, of the Manufacturing X Guidance Board. And if you hear what Michael has just said about, let's say, bundling resources, making sure that we do not end up in silos, that's probably also part of, let's say, the job, right, at the Guidance Board for Manufacturing X, right?
Yeah. So we know that there's multiple projects going on. And if every project just runs its course, there will be multiple implementations of mainly the same things. So we can't have that. We need some kind of governance. Now, governance is being established slowly and in consensus, and it takes time. And in the meantime, we're all moving forward. And again, we can't have that. So this is why we said, let's create a voluntary group. We called it the Manufacturing X Guidance Board, where all projects, all relevant projects, are represented. And we simply identify those areas where an overlap exists and where, when we go differently, it will mean that the end system will not be interoperable, compatible, and so on. That's what we do there. It's purely voluntarily, and it hinges on the idea, as you said, one implementation, right? Because we cannot specify everything so that multiple implementations will be identical. We just cannot. It's too much work. So let's define one test system. Let's define, hopefully, that's my vote, one development environment. Because if we all develop on the same code line, well, it will be the same product after all. If we have different repositories, different code lines, they will diverge. So, yeah, I'm definitely supporting what you're saying. And it will be a big, big task to make that work. Because that means that every project somehow has to stand back at times and say, I will not do this super duper feature, which maybe my constituents would like, but I will rather do something that works for everybody.
Very good. Thank you very much, Georg. Now it's also for me the time to ask you from the stage. And we were good in time, but now we are a little bit running out of time, so I need to be more time conscious here. And this is also why I would like to ask Leona now on stage in order to make sure that you also be with us here. So, Leona, you are working for KU Leuven, and you are, let's say, of course, well, not a stranger to this group, don't misunderstand me, but you are, let's say, focusing on the legal aspects of things. And perhaps I can share an anecdote. I was socialized with IT projects like you need to have one guy from business and another one who understands technologies, two people. But now it's people like you who always have to be in the room, Leona, which is very good, which is a great thing, because we always need to look at the legal perspective. And if you could, let's say, outline a little bit from your expertise, and you are one of the powerhouses when it comes to, let's say, data economic legislation. What does it mean, interoperability on a legal level? You know?
Well, to reassure you and also everybody else, for me, listening to the other panelists, it really resonated with what my kind of legal assessment is for legal interoperability. So legal interoperability is a kind of unusual term, probably to most of you. The idea of semantic interoperability is much more commonplace, but it's actually the European interoperability framework that mentions legal interoperability. And what it really means is the question that we're discussing. So how, when we have different kind of organizations or data spaces that have been set up or operate under different legal frameworks, how can we ensure that they work together? So this is the big challenge, and not to go into the long list of EU legislation that we now have on data, because we certainly don't have time for that. But we do have, for instance, the Data Act, Data Governance Act, even an implementing act on high-value data sets. But the most important thing for you to understand is that these legal frameworks really try and embed EU values and principles, so things like transparency and proportionality and fairness. So when it comes to trying to move forward with legal interoperability, I think a first start is these principles. And I think aligning on these principles helps us to build trust. And then to move on, I think what's been mentioned, we need to actually enter into a dialogue. So we need this kind of co-creation and knowledge sharing with other countries, so beyond the European perspective. And maybe one way to do this is actually through real examples. So testing and trying to explore what are the barriers, and that will depend on the country, on the sector. And I think we need to do more to kind of do these almost interoperability checks, you know, from a legal perspective. And just a final note, I also think that data spaces have the opportunity to support legal compliance as well. So I think we need to look more at that perspective too, to what extent we can see some auditing and reporting and how that could actually possibly help in the case of the circular economy and sustainability. So hopefully it's not too shocking. Rather, I actually agree with all the panelists, and they made my work very easy. But I think legal interoperability, we need a multifaceted approach. And yes, we could have some legal harmonization for principles, for example, but it's also more than that. It's collaboration, co-creation, and also more kind of innovative facilitation and seeing the legal frameworks as that sort of a mechanism.
Yeah, very good. That's very compelling. Yunhai brings me back also to you. You have also a role in Catena X. You are a member of the Catena X Automotive Network, so the association. Well, if you would describe your role in the automotive ecosystem.
Yeah, okay. And we are very glad to join the ContainerX actually and active in this organization for a long time. And we have already built up the data exchange solutions that's based on all the roles from ContainerX and also from the ITSA, right? So right now, because I'm from Huawei Cloud, so the cloud, everything will be running on that. So all the cloud, what we have done is to have all the certifications that are needed, no matter in which country, to follow all the rules. And this is for the situation right now. And I'm not from the lawyer part, but last week I just come back from the Paris Automotive Show. So I've been there, and I saw a lot of Chinese OEMs to show there also. And that's the trend I have seen. And thanks for and Huawei is also an international company, so we are a rich experience also in China, in here. So based on us, we can help in all these companies, no matter it's the company here in Europe going to China or the Chinese company is going to here. We are glad to provide our tools and solution with this data space to helping them. All this related data exchange in the automotive factory, also in other manufacturing factory, industry, or others. That's what we are doing,
So we have 2 minutes left. Very short. Michael, what is the category A liaison that you as Eclipse maintain with ISO? In one sentence, and then...
So we have a specification process. Our community can build specification under the umbrella of the Eclipse Foundation. And the category A liaison gives us the right to take that specification and let's get it transposed by the I2JTC1, the special subcommittee 38, in this case for data spaces, to make it an official ISO standard. So the advantage is our process are majority-based, not consensus-based. So we are much faster. Once we are done, we bring this in front of the ISO, and then after about 6 months, this is transposed in an ISO standard, which is much faster than doing the same under the umbrella of the ISO directly.
That is an important thing to know for all of us, because this is a huge opportunity for us. Now, Svenja, unfortunately, you only have 1 minute left to, let's say, because, as I mentioned, you have, let's say, the business model perspective on it, and I think you are the perfect candidate to summarize a little bit what we have learned today.
So, data is a strategic resource. We have global supply chains. We have global problems around climate change, around other things. So we need, in order to achieve our objectives, both from an economic and social standpoint, we need cross-border data exchange. And in order to do that, we need the right frameworks, agreements that are built on trust, and the right technological sort of foundations and governance frameworks to make it work. Let's go.
Very good. We are 10 seconds ahead of time. So thank you, everybody, all the, let's say, not only the panelists. Thanks for really making the effort to be part of this panel. It was great. It was huge fun. And to all of you, thanks for attending this session. I think we are really up on something really important, really urgent, but also I can tell you, which I mentioned earlier, it's lots of fun. So let's keep up this spirit. Talk to you soon. Thank you, everybody, very much.